Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the wonderful movie A Complete Unknown. I'm joined today by writer, director, and producer James Mangold, as well as cast members Monica Barbaro, Edward Norton, and Boyd Holbrook. And James, one of the things that I wanted to start by asking you about was, obviously you did incredible amounts of research in working on the script and telling the story. But I love the fact that there's always so many contradictions in the way that people will talk about their experiences or things that happen in Bob's life because, he's kind of self-mythologized his own life as well. And I was just curious about how you approach telling a story about him with that in mind and really getting to play around with the idea of your own version of a truth in a film that still kind of keeps us at a little bit of a distance because he's kind of unknowable.
Well, it's a great question. I think the one thing that happens when you interview all these people and you read all these books is you begin to assimilate the known knowns, as they might say, as what Caspar Weinberger, who is it, Edward, who said that? No, it's the other guy, defense secretary.
McNamara, right?
I don't know, the known knowns. It becomes very clear what definitely happened, and then you get the ones where people have different perspectives on them. But the beautiful thing about drama is I kind of almost don't have to pick a lane because I can play out the Pete version through Pete. And I can play out the Bob version through Bob. And that you kind of, because it's not so much as everyone is restipulating the facts of things, it's more just the way they felt them. So there isn't a lot of disagreement, certainly, about what, there's dates of recordings in studios and when Bob lived in this apartment and when he arrived and when Woody Guthrie was in this hospital and when Pete was on trial, and all these things you can arrange in a timeline, and there's not a hell of a lot of debate about them. How people perceive things is the only thing where subjectivity plays a huge role. And the only thing I found is you try and give every character, whether it's Joan or Pete or Johnny Cash or Bob, you try and give each of them allow them to have the perspective they represent or the blind spot that they represent, and not challenge it. Like, let them live in that and let the other actors playing their characters come at them. Let those actual alternate versions play out live, if that makes any sense.
It does. I love that answer and that description. And Monica, in jumping over to you, I've heard you say that you really found that working on the music for playing Joan was something that was instrumental in really kind of connecting you to her and helping to figure out who she was, and in particular with the lens of that particular time period. And so just wanted to ask a little bit about how that helped you in developing her as a character as much as it was about working on the music.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was definitely the biggest feat in portraying Joan. I mean, the fact that she is this, incredible musician, and I had no musical experience of any kind. That was the first thing that I had to really get into. And, it's what we all did. It's, Ed and Boyd and Timmy. And I mean, just really absorbing each musician's version of their songs. I think it was really interesting to hear, like, for instance, with Joan, her version of House of the Rising Sun was really, it's really unique. And I think, learning that and marrying that to the research that I was doing at the same time, and then listening to the way she sort of hovers on a bit about her sister, I think, like, you sort of develop a connection to the person that's really wonderful as you embrace their creative act and the research that you're doing, which I think was just, that was a really cool experience.
That's so great. Ed, in talking about your portrayal of Pete, I think his passion, not just for the music, in terms of folk music, but also just that sense of community that he's so protective of really comes across. And it's something that he's so excited for people to discover and to welcome them into it. And it feels like that's a huge part of why he's so protective of it in terms of just the community and the relationships and the friendships. And so I just wanted to ask you about, really capturing the essence of that throughout your portrayal.
Yeah, I think I was trying to describe the movie to my 11-year-old son, and he recently said, I think that Pete Seeger is sort of like Gandalf and Bob is like Frodo. It's sort of like Fellowship of the Ring. And I started to laugh, and then I looked at him and said, why didn't you say that before we started this film? Like, I said, that's perfect. Like, it is the Fellowship of the, I said, so if you love The Lord of the Rings, you'll love A Complete Unknown. But no, I do feel, joking aside, that fellowship, when my son said it's like the Fellowship of the Ring, I would say fellowship is a very Pete Seeger word, and very much what he indeed cultivated. And I think it is a nice, he was of a very different generation than the rest of them, and had been a part of he actually had been sort of the inspiration to many of them. Joan Baez told me that he was the hinge for her. She had been into R&B, and that she shifted to being a folk singer when she saw a Pete Seeger concert. And I think, I don't know what I'm saying, but I think Jim and I, there are certain photographs I just loved of Pete watching Bob play, with an expression on his face of joy that a thing he had cultivated was ascendant. And I think that what Jim was saying, that I felt, was that this was not about biography as much as it was about the collisions of people, and the way that Dylan, like a pinball machine, he bounced between Pete and Joan and Johnny Cash, and the whole thing started lighting up. The collisions were lighting everything up, and out of that came this moment that bloomed and then dissipated, and it's sort of fascinating that it happened and came apart fairly quickly.
It also means if it's like Lord of the Rings, that we need several more movies for each point in the story.
For sure.
Boyd, in talking about your portrayal of Johnny Cash, it feels like he really understands how difficult it is to retain a voice that's so authentically yours. And it's something that, he really managed to do throughout his career in such a beautiful way. And so in terms of that dynamic that you create on screen between him and between Bob, how did you want that to be really central? Because it's something that, he really wants to instill in him, and also really admires in seeing someone else that holds that level of importance to it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think in the grand scheme of things, Bob is at a crossroads in his life, and Johnny being the senior of the relationship, I think he's been down that road, and he has an opportunity to be him and keep his singular voice. And with the circus of all of the industry, when it comes alive and you're just not playing and writing these songs for yourself, it becomes something different, a new beast you are in the machine. I think Johnny's a reminder of no matter what cost, you have to retain who you are. And I think that's the creativity and the genius that Bob brought to it. And that's why Johnny reached out to him in the first place, through these letters of admiration for his music and for his ability to create these songs that were just really revolutionary at the time.
I mean, it's such a romantic notion that Johnny Cash, kind of at the height of his career, would listen to this album by someone he hadn't heard much about before, and would just rattle off a note of absolute adoration to this guy.
19-year-old kid.
19, and that
It made me cry. It gave me a tear in the film when I saw that. I think it's like it's one of the most romantic things in the film. It's like there's Bob's women, but I actually think maybe the love affair that never breaks
Johnny
in
and
the
him
film
have,
is with
yes.
Johnny.
Well, and I think we all have had moments, maybe not as dramatic as Johnny Cash, but moments where just someone you admire knows what you did or recognizes the quality of a choice you made. And it's just at a young point in your career, it's so monumental, so much more than, record sales or box office or anything, just to know that someone you worship or really admire recognizes something good in your work, and it's beautiful. And it's really beautiful for the person who's busy and at the full flower of their career for taking the time to let someone know.
Yeah,
And that's
I love
in terms of romantic with Johnny, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that description. Monica, in talking a little bit more about Joan as well, she was someone who was already established at the time that she met Bob and kind of had this real comfort on stage and professionalism, which is kind of diametrically opposed to the way that Bob really kind of approaches being on stage, where he's like very fluid and very improvisational. And I love that the fact that it creates both this connectivity, of each of them trying to take something from the other, but then also that's part of where the animosity comes in as well. And so just wanted to ask about how you were playing this whole like juxtaposition of emotions, where there is this real magnetism between the two of them, but then there's also this anger and frustration that comes through in different moments in different ways for different reasons as well.
I think the beautiful thing about getting to work with Timothy on this film was I just had complete trust in whatever he showed up with. In one of those more contentious moments, it's the Pittsburgh concert where he leaves her on stage. And what wound up in the film was something that I didn't even remember either of us actually even saying on the day. But while we were filming it, Timmy was improvising and throwing all kinds of crazy in the mix, and I just felt like complete trust in him and his approach to Bob and his understanding of Bob and what I had come to the table with, and I just felt like we sort of had siloed experiences in the music training and in the research and everything, and we didn't really sit in any way and like talk about the scenes or about their relationship. It wasn't a cerebral sort of process. We weren't like designing the thing ahead of time, but we were just sort of showing up with our present work as these people, and kind of we just got to trust what the scene was about and the words on the page and what Jim was looking for, and just be in the present moment with each other and receive what was in front of us. So yeah, I thought that was really rewarding. And then as far as like whether it's friction or it's intimacy or whatever part of their process that they're in and throughout the duration of the film, I think is just that was sort of felt like it was in Jim's hands in a way, and he would just sort of be like, here's this today, and we could just kind of show up and do that, if that makes any sense.
It does. It's so great, and Ed, in talking about Pete a little bit more, I think this film so beautifully captures the communication and the way that relationships are really formed and created through music and kind of what you can communicate to the other person. When he first invites Bob to play for Woody, that's the beginning of a friendship existing, and there's so much communication between the two of them through music, and was interested in how you really used the music to capture all of the elements of this friendship and this real intimacy that he had with Bob.
Yeah, I think it's there's a little bit of a test in it, a little bit of, I think there are moments you look to see if someone's really in your tribe or not. And, this troubadour, this waif can show up with a guitar and everything, but it's sort of, I do feel there's a little bit in that moment where he's sort of like, if you don't get that guitar out and play, then you're not for real. And then when he does, it's the opposite. It's instantly and forever. They know that he's in their tribe, and it's not just in Pete, but in Woody's face with that amazing performance I think Scoot gives of just conveying so much in the reactions that Woody has to Pete, Woody has to Bob. That you feel people who are cut from the same cloth kind of coming together. But I think I don't know. I think what Jim was saying earlier is very, very true. There's the most interesting things are not sort of biographical points, but they're the idea that competing things can coexist. But you can respect and admire and appreciate a person and be also competitive with them and antagonistic with them and very resentful of them. And you can you can support someone and then expect them to owe you something. And all those things coexist. They don't really cancel each other out. And I think what I appreciate in the way Jim took us down this was that there was never going to be a conclusion. There was never going to be a judgment made by the film. And I think you're allowed to exit the story with left to your own conclusions about what type of integrity you admire most and how you think these people treated each other. It's not conclusory, and I think that's wonderful. I love films that leave it in my lap, and I can name a lot of my favorite films. I would say leave it in your lap to sort through that messiness, and I think I love that was Jim's approach to it, was the coexisting paradoxes.
Yeah, absolutely. Boyd, in talking a little bit about the way that you prepared for this role as well, you have the logistical and the technical elements and working with a dialect coach and a guitar teacher and a singing coach and a movement coach. But then it's also just as much about the emotional fabric of this person, and even just the idea, like I've heard you say that his humor and his comedy was like a real essence of it. And so when you were preparing for it, how was it just like this real journey between like the technical aspects, but also just the bigger emotional fabric being so important as well?
Yeah, well, I don't know what Jim saw in me in the beginning of this, but I trusted Jim that he would trust me and we would figure this out together as we have in the past. And he's a real...
Boyd loves to transform. That's all I knew. And he always brings a part of himself. But I kind of have no ceiling on what he can transform into in my own mind. And if that's just my own addition about it, is that, and I have a lot of trust because I've seen him do it before. He just applies a very he's very methodic about slowly pushing out his own boundaries, and you just give him the space to do it. Honestly, I had very little to do with it other than being thrilled with the results.
And writing a great character. I mean, a lot of it's on the page, a lot of it's found, but I didn't play like Monica's saying and Edward's saying. I couldn't play and sing music at the beginning of this. I think I may have lied to Jim and said that. But the practicality is you have 2-3 hours a day for 4 months to learn a couple songs. But in that, you're figuring out, one of the greatest songs ever written, Boy Named Sue, in my opinion. And there's so much humor and just sheer brilliance in writing a song like that with such humor. And, obviously...
And rage, I love that. That's kind of rage in that song.
Oh, yeah, it's a full, three-act play in a song. And you start to define, like, what kind of sense of humor he has. And really bringing that out, again, to the point that we're talking about earlier, where it's just like keeping your voice no matter what, go down with the ship if you have to, and then, rise from the ashes. But, a lot of the car scene was written really well, but always with Jim, if you can come in super prepared, then Jim will enhance your performance into a cinematic expression where you'll, now pivot on this line and come into this frame, and it just becomes a different thing that you can't prepare for that, only other than having everything
else
buttoned up and existing and ready to go, and Coca-Colas can fall off cars, and you can do different things and scenes. And
what he doesn't know, though, is that plan doesn't really exist before I've seen what he's doing. So they both happen at the same moment, meaning I'll see what Edward, Monica, or Boyd are doing, and I have some idea of what I want to do with the scene, but then I see what they're doing. And then where the rectangle lands and what kind of cutting pattern you see for the scene, at least I've learned that you're kind of really missing out when you have this kind of caliber of acting around you if you don't tailor what you have to what they're doing,
Yeah,
it's on the day.
It's kind of coming together, yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
It's such a great point, and I love hearing all of these details about the film. Congratulations on the movie, and thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so
you.
much.
You.
Great questions.